Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're continuing our Disturbing series by looking at the most fucked up stuff about the Forerunners. The race that have always been present in the background of the Halo games have some pretty dark things in their detailed past. So sit back and let's take a look at the dark side of the Forerunners. Number 3. Precursor Genocide. The Precursors were the seeders of the galaxy, the creators of all life that we've ever experienced. And the Forerunners wiped them out, their own creators. What caused the war with the Precursors is still relatively unknown. Some sources say that the Precursors planned to give the mantle of responsibility to humanity, which, as you'd expect, greatly angered the Forerunners and led them down such a violent path, whereas other sources say that the Precursors had planned to eradicate the Forerunners from existence. Whatever the cause, the Forerunners surprised the Precursors by attacking them completely off guard. They had no idea it was coming. They had no idea that one of their own creations would rebel against them so powerfully. Most were wiped out at the beginning of the war, purely because of how taken aback they were, but some managed to escape to other galaxies, and some of the most esteemed warrior servants within the Forerunners assembled a task force to hunt them down. They followed the few remainders to the Path Chthona galaxy, which was a satellite galaxy just off from the Milky Way galaxy, an area that would become a key part of their war against the Flood in the years to come, and when they reached it, they finished off their violent genocide. However, none of those who travelled to this satellite galaxy would ever return. What they'd done to their creators really didn't sit right with some of them at all. In committing the genocide, they directly violated the mantle of responsibility, which ironically was what inspired them to commit these acts of extreme violence. Those who brought this up were either exterminated or exiled to barren planets to live out the rest of their days in exile, and the rest of the warrior servants ended up dying from unknown causes. So ultimately, those who were exiled by their fellow warriors were the only survivors, left to pass on the tales of their genocide down the generations, and keep up the dark, dark past of the Forerunners. Number 2. The Composers. The Composers were tools built by the Forerunners during the Forerunner-Flood War. Their purpose was to turn organic beings' essences, which is pretty much their soul and everything that makes them, into digital data. Now originally, they were built to allow the Forerunners to move their consciousness into the domain, a vast wealth of data built on precursor neural physics, but during the war with the Flood, they were repurposed to be used directly against the Flood. This repurposing turned the Composers into an extremely torturous device, and made the transformation of a person from physical to digital extremely unsettling. The effective composition was likely altered to include extreme heat, because heat is a direct counter to the Flood and the rotting flesh that they have on combat forms. To compose someone, the Composer fires out a bright orange beam of light, capable of engulfing seemingly infinite victims. This light gets so hot it melts away the skin, followed by the muscle and tissue, and then even the skeleton, leaving nothing but a smoking pile of ash behind. The plan was to use the Composer to extract the personalities from the Flood-infected beings, essentially rescuing their souls from their diseased bodies, but this ultimately failed, in a very weird manner too. So when an essence was extracted from a combat form and implanted into a fresh, uninfected host, the new body would begin to rot extremely quickly, almost as if the Flood infection had reached the very soul of the Forerunner. After abandoning the Composers, when times got desperate towards the end of the war, the Didact finally found another use for them, creating the Prometheans. He used the Composer on a number of high-ranking warrior servants, converting them painfully from physical to robotic beings to make them immune to the Flood infection. Now, although this technically worked, the number of Promethean Knights this created was far too small to even put a dent in the Flood forces, so the Didact was forced to use the Composer on innocent humans, excruciatingly extracting their souls to increase his numbers against their will, an act that directly violated the mantle of responsibility and led to the Didact's imprisonment in the Cryptum. And in the number 1 spot, we have Faber, the Master Builder. Faber of Will and Might is without a doubt the most disturbing character in the Halo universe, and I genuinely mean that. Holding the rank of Master Builder, Faber was one of the highest ranking Forerunners during their war against the Flood. He fought the Didact and the rest of the Forerunner Council tooth and nail to get permission to construct his prize inventions that would change the galaxy forever, the Halo Rings. He conducted unsanctioned experiments on humans at Flood research facilities that coined the name the Palace of Pain. Now that's something that we've already talked about, so I'm not going to go into too much detail today, but basically his goal was to try and find a cure for the Flood. Now he tried pretty much everything under the sun, ultimately resorting to trying to extract the Gaesh from the humans, which was essentially a genetic script placed in the humans by the librarian. Now, as you'd imagine, extracting something like this was an extremely painful procedure, as were the rest of his experiments, which ultimately left the humans deformed, non-functioning, dead, or barely living. Sometimes he'd let them go back to their societies, but reports indicated that those who came back were different, changed by what he'd done to them. And the worst part is, Faber's extreme sadism meant that he enjoyed these experiments, and ultimately, when the Primordial gained control of the research facilities he worked in, it let Faber continue these extremely unethical experiments purely because of the enjoyment they all got out of it. Later on during the war, Faber was responsible for kidnapping and stranding the Didact in an area of the galaxy known as a burn, which was essentially the term the Forerunners gave to a galactic region that was completely overwhelmed and infected by the Flood. He left the Didact along with a couple other Forerunners stranded on a barely working ship in this horrible region of the galaxy, pretty much because of the culmination of long-running political and tactical disagreements that him and the Didact had had. This led to the Didact being captured by the Gravemind, suffering extreme mental torture, and eventually getting a form of the Logic Plague, which sent him insane. This insanity was all part of the Gravemind's plan, to turn the most esteemed Forerunner warrior servant into a complete mess, destroying any remaining hope that the Forerunners had that they could maybe beat the Flood. And the worst thing was, it was all facilitated by Faber. So that concludes my list of 3 of the most disturbing acts carried out by the Forerunners of the Halo universe. To be honest, I think it's pretty much undisputable that not only does Faber take the most disturbing aspect of the Forerunners' cake, but also the title of the most sickening and fucked up character in the Halo universe. I genuinely don't know of another character that led to more death, destruction, and sickening torture than Faber. Like, despite how little we know about him, I don't know any character that even comes close, so yeah, we just discussed some pretty crazy stuff, my dudes. Anyways, I want to give a big thank you to Ardent, Tomahawk, Taylor, Evan, Chris, Jack, Stefan, and Eric, and everybody else on Patreon for the immensely generous support, as per usual. Like, seriously, even at a time like now where I'm nowhere near as active as I'd like to be, you guys still supporting me on there means the world, so thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.